And for more on the China-EU summit, we are joined in the Beijing studio, Mr. Cui Hongjian, a senior research fellow and director of the Department of European Studies from the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome, sir, to our program. Meanwhile, we're also joined from Brussels, Mr. Fraser the director of the EU Asia Center, who was also a former British diplomat and EU official. Welcome to both of you. Mr. Cameron, we understand the UK welcomed its second female prime minister, Theresa May, even though the handover of power will take a few days between Mr. Cameron and Ms. May. It seems that politics stabilized a bit in London. What do you make of this new development?
Well, it's quite extraordinary. It's almost like a Shakespearean drama, the way that the main advocates of the Leave campaign have all sort of dropped dead on the floor with daggers dripping blood. Johnson's gone, Gove's gone, Leedson's gone, Nigel Farage is gone, and Theresa May stands there as the winner. She was actually a quiet supporter of Remain campaign. And now she has got the difficult job, firstly, of uniting the party, and secondly, of negotiating a sensible withdrawal of Britain from the EU over the next couple of years. So it's a pretty big task, but most people think she is a very experienced and capable politician and will do a reasonably good job.
What would that mean for Europe from your perspective, Mr. Cui? After all, the UK is still one of the biggest economies on the European continent, whether there's a Brexit or not.
Yes, exactly. So I think that's the reason why I think, especially from China's perspective, we should keep a very close observation. How is the relations in future between UK and the EU? Because yes, now the UK is still the fifth biggest economy in the world, but maybe not tomorrow, because it depends how could this kind of arrangement between UK and the EU, especially because from the Leave campaign during the referendum, they give a very, very good picture to average people in UK, so that once we leave from EU, we will have a bigger platform, we have more and more opportunities to have a bigger and bigger economy.
There are three things that is fluid right now, Mr. Cameron, it seems. One is how the UK would assemble itself together once again, be united, quote unquote, to work on its own problems and challenges. Secondly is how the EU would also clean its own backyards in order to get rid of some of the problems and move forward for the better. The thirdly, of course, is the interaction between the UK and the EU, and what would that mean for all the other countries who are looking at themselves and suggesting whether they should stay or remain under what circumstances. So, Mr. Cameron, given all of these three fluid fronts, what do you think could be the advice that you could have for China, who is, of course, looking at the European continent, pondering, what's next?
Well, nothing's going to change in the immediate future. Britain will be a member until 2019. And in that period, I think some of the issues will be clarified as regards the outlines of a new trade deal between Britain and the EU. Meanwhile, the EU will continue trade negotiations with China, with Japan, India, the United States, and will take into account these new circumstances. So there will be a certain amount of uncertainty, but basically the EU will remain in business, and as we know from today's summit, it will want to remain a good partner for China.
The EU wants to remain as it was to a certain extent, Mr. Cui, but that is coming from the EU leaders.
No.
It is not necessarily coming from the statement or every capital. So there is a difference between that. And having said that, though, Mr. Cui, what do you think? After this Brexit, there has been a lot of soul searching, both inside the UK and in other countries of the EU, about what kind of politics they want, what kind of European Union they want, what kind of freedom, as they committed the four types of freedoms of the EU, they really want, and under what circumstances. So how would this eventually impact on the future direction of the EU as a whole?
Yes, I think that certainly now it's a very, very big question for European Union, for European integration, as we call it. But of course, the Brexit and also the referendum, it's just a very, British style answer to this question. Of course, the answer is we have to leave. But of course, now that's also a reason why now within the European Union, there are more and more debates or discussions. How could the European Union do some reform to, to be faced of this, all of these, different answers from member states, not only from UK, because if we, as we know that now there are some more and more, Eurosceptics in member states, not only from UK, from Central and Eastern European countries, but certainly there are, different concerns and different answers. But I think maybe some common, questions to European Union is how could the European Union to have some more efficiency to deal with some issue like a refugee issue or data crisis, and how could the European Union have some more representativeness, not only just have a parliament, how could it narrow down the gap between the, the elites in Brussels and those average people in member states.
Yes, that's very interesting. That is also an issue, the efficiency issue concerning, it seems, some of the issues between China and the EU. For example, market economy status. Mr. Cameron, Beijing has been insisting on its rights to embrace a market economy status coming from the EU. We understand there has been different opinions over the years, member states, they do not necessarily agree with one another, and there's the efficiency issue as well, the proceedings. So what do you make these kind of international relations, international trade and economic ties issues, will that be, in a way, getting better resolved with the soul searching of the EU after Brexit? Or am I doing some wishful thinking?
Yeah. No, I think the very latest polls in most member states have shown an increased support for the EU even after Brexit. I certainly don't think there will be any copycat referendum anywhere else. But there are certainly different visions of where Europe would go, and until we have the elections next year in France, Germany, Italy and the Netherlands, we will not be able to take any major steps forward. So in the meantime, I think we will have more of the same, of the EU continuing to negotiate. It's still the largest trade bloc in the world, and it will have to demonstrate to both its citizens and to partners, particularly China, that it is capable of doing deals, whether it's on the market economy status, whether it's on the bilateral investment treaty. But the EU will remain in business, absolutely.
What do you think, Mr. Cui? Market economy status, China's enormous amount of investment and potential investment on the European continent, how would these be better protected in a way so that the trade relations will still be on track?
Yes, exactly. I think that now this MES issue in Brussels, even now we find out perhaps agreement in Parliament. But indeed, we can find out, conflicts within the member states of the European Union, because we can find out perhaps UK, okay, a very, a case to support China on this issue, or maybe some other European Union member states, which has a, very good competitiveness compared with Chinese product and so on. But another question is, how could European Union to form a single attitude on this issue, and how could China and the European Union work together to deal with the issue of overcapacity? Because I don't think the overcapacity issue is a difficult issue between China and the EU, because it's a global phenomenon after this very bad situation for all the economy. So I think this time between China and the EU for the summit, both leaders could touch this issue and try to get some consensus that this issue is not an issue between us. It's an issue we need to work together to deal with.
All right. Of course, overcapacity, one could easily be reminded of the steel production inside China and also inside the European countries. But the question is, Mr. Cui, with so much turbulent politics going on, whether at the capitals of the EU countries and also in Brussels. Can politicians really work on real issues? Do they still have the extra energy? But of course, the real issues, once being worked on, would really contribute to the real answers. But the thing is, what is their priority? What is your sense here, Mr. Cui?
Yes, I think that's always a very, very big question, not only within European Union, between different institutions in Brussels, and also always a bigger question between China and the EU. Just like Mr. Farage from UK, this time after Brexit, he criticized some member of parliament in Brussels, said, you did not create any job opportunity for people. You just stay in your office, you just say, okay, just criticize somebody else, some country like China, like that. So I think now the question is, how could the European Union recognize the common challenge for China and the European Union?
I see. Of course, Mr. Farage's statements have been interpreted in so many different ways by so many different people who get to know his personalities over the decades. But having said that, though, Mr. Cameron, your thoughts, can the politicians really work on the real issues, particularly issues between China and the EU? After all, these are big trade partners for one another.
Of course. I mean, you shouldn't forget that actual problems in trade amount to less than 2% of total trade, and we have a similar, percentage in the problems we have with the United States. It's inevitable when you have a trade relationship as big as that between the EU and China, there will be problems from time to time. But remember, 80% of trade flows quite satisfactorily, and there are new agreements, new areas to work on, whether it's connectivity, digital areas, the environment, green growth, urbanization. There's actually a very positive agenda there between the EU and China, and this is what the leaders will be discussing today. So although the media headlines may focus on MES and to some extent South China Sea, there is a very practical, positive EU-China agenda.
That's why we're featuring this topic also on our show as well, Mr. Cameron. Thank you so much, Fraser Cameron and also Cui Hongjian. Thank you very much, the two gentlemen, for being with us.